Hi, welcome back to Storytime with Dave Booker. Apologize for the lateness. I try and have these out every couple of 2 or 3 days, and this one's been a little bit longer. But let's begin with the next chapter in Gods and More Gods. So give me a moment. In his Spartan office, Fred was looking over the current reports from Earth version 199.0. Almost 200 iterations, and he still couldn't get Earth balanced right. Running his fingers down the ages of pages, he saw that the problem was part human and part gods. The gods continued to spend too much time in competition. It wasn't for converts, it was for the most original sacrifices, the most area, or even the most devotion. He shook his head at the god of the Aztecs sending his people to war on anybody they could find, and then having the captured people sacrificed by the hundreds and thousands. For him, it was numbers that counted, but he did little for them in return. God had won a commendation for changing from people to sacrifices to using animals. Some of the more progressive gods considered that any sacrifice was unnecessary and devotion and work should be enough. Odin spent his time boozing and womanizing, and Zeus was even worse. You don't go lusting after some human and change yourself into a bull to get her alone. Hell, that's just abnormal thinking, and poor Europa was traumatized. Every time they started again, they just did what they had done before, or worse. Now his own position was in jeopardy. He walked over to the window that looked out over his administration office. Millions of spirits were constantly occupied in keeping records updated, collated, annotated, and any other aided that could be thought up just to keep them occupied. He wandered around the floor watching how industrious and diligent they were. Shifts weren't long, as he had more people than he needed. They'd work for 6 hours and go to their rooms for rest and relaxation, or do whatever they wanted for another 18 hours, and then they go back to work. He had to do something with all the spirits floating around. When the time came, they too would be reborn again and again, living life after life until the next end of time arrived. A constant cycle and a constant mess every time. The gods were no better than a collection of favored college Delta Tau Chi students. Sitting in the enormous break room, he sat with a cup of strong coffee and looked over some of the relaxing spirits. This was the only room where they could attain a small amount of physical being. This way they could enjoy a small portion of their former lives, eating, drinking, and sometimes even doing some things a little bit more physical. Each shift an hour was allotted for breaks, and the finest food and beverages were always available from an automat type setup. Fred saw an attractive figure crouched in the corner. Without seeing her face, he recognized Gladys, who was the mom of the place. She was constantly checking on everyone, offering to bring them coffee or giving them an encouraging word. She spent most of her time keeping the mood of the office light and pleasant. At present, she was crouched in front of Gary, trying to be encouraging and cheer him up. Gary was always bummed about something. It was like having Eeyore working for you. Don came in and was checking who was on break. He was a terror for ensuring nobody took more than their hour allotted. Folks in the office had several names for him, from mild to obscene. Don had no authority, but acted as the general manager of the place and did his best to be in everybody's business. Spirits scurried out of his way to avoid his caustic manners. At his side was Ash, wearing an ingratiating grin. He was kind of a Uriah Heep character from a Dickens novel. In fact, in a former life, he had been Dickens' inspiration, constantly wringing his fawning hands as he looked up and down anxious for his signal. Don pointed to Larry, who was waiting until the very last second before returning to his cubicle. As Don pointed his finger at Larry, Ash leapt into action. Rushing over, he wheedled and whined and cajoled Larry into rising and returning to work. Larry attempted to stay, but the sound of Ash's voice and whimpering drove him crazy. He hurried to his cubicle and put up a video of spreadsheets playing on his screen. He slipped on a pair of googly eyeglasses he had been buried with and settled himself for at least a 2-hour nap. Spirits passing by marveled at his industry. His spreadsheets were quickly filled out and filed, with a fresh one taking its place and filled out in its turn. In all the millennium, no one had ever divined Larry's secret. Don made a beeline for Fred, with Ash following. They sat down at his table, causing Fred to sigh inwardly. He hated being trapped by Don. Don was as much of a sycophant as Ash was. Don handed Fred a cigar. Hell, I don't know why I was buried with these. Can't smoke them, so you might as well do it for me. At least I can smell it. Fred knew this was an inducement to keep him in Fred's mind if a promotion was ever in the offing, but a good cigar was a good cigar. He obligingly lit it and inhaled deeply. Yeah, that's a good cigar, Fred remarked. Good, Donald cried incredulously. They're the best. Straight from Cuba when they made cigar rolling into a fine art. Don breathed in heavily and was at risk of hyperventilating. Ash covered his mouth and nose with his handkerchief. Smell was not to his liking. Excuse me. Don pulled his chair closer to Fred's, his voice taking on a wheedling tone tinged with mock sympathy. Boss, I heard that through the grapevine that the head office is thinking of putting someone else in charge here. I'd sure hate to think of someone else sitting in behind that desk. Fred wondered how the hell word got around the facility so fast. Don edged still closer, his eyes hypnotically fixed on Fred's. Boss, you know damn well nothing's going to change. The next time, they've gotten set in their ways. Fred blew out a cloud of smoke, filling the break room and sending people running back to work. Hell, it's no good telling me stuff I already know. If you haven't got a solution, then you're just wasting my time. He flung the cigar on the ground and ground it out. Storming off to his office, he saw Ash dive under the table to get the cigar. He knew Ash would now spend the next few hours unrolling and re-rolling the remnants into a new cigar for Don. Fred took a break and went to the club. Picking a quiet corner, he was immediately handed his usual drink by Berthold. Fred looked at him with admiration. I don't know how you do it. Every time I come here, I pick a different spot, yet you always find me immediately and bring me, he took a sip, the best Bloody Mary, absolutely perfect every time. Earl nodded in appreciation of the compliment. Sir, you look troubled. Is there anything I can do or get you? Fred shook his head. Looking out, he saw the gods all relaxed and having a swell time while he sweated blood and was in danger of losing everything. Earl saw what he was looking at. A pity, sir, that these cannot be changed for others who would not only have concern for their charges, but concern for yourself as well. Fred nodded. Yeah, a great pity. Finishing his drink, he headed back to in his office. Fred reached over to pick up the folder. Well, realizing he'd read the reports hundreds of times with nothing to show for it, he pulled back. Lowering his head into his hands, frustration welled in him. How was he going to get his gods to balance out the earth? Yin and yang, perfect balance. Plenty of planets had done it, just took time, patience, and a willingness to work together. Looking at his calendar, he saw that the following day he was to meet with the gods and collect their applications. He'd look them over, see what types of area they wanted, and then assign them. Same thing all over again. Maybe he should add something different. Maybe, just maybe, he should have them write out a report on how they were going to make the earth balance. Might give them work. Might give them a chance to show some initiative. See if their experiences had given them any insight. Yeah, that's a spirit. Rising slowly, as if the word spirit was giving him insight. What had Don said, that the old gods were set in their ways? They no longer cared what happened to himself or the people they were supposed to lead? Maybe an infusion of new blood was indicated. Don passed below, ensuring things were running smoothly. He was always on the ball and even stayed late, keeping a few spirits with him when things required it. Well, which was almost never. But still, maybe. Fred sat at his desk again and wrote his thoughts out on a sheet of vellum. Sealing it with his off-the-shelf seal, he transmitted it via cosmic ray to his boss. By tomorrow, he'd have a response and just possibly a way to salvage his job. He went home feeling more positive than he had in many a session. It was just possible things would be looking up for the next iteration. Seated in the kitchen, he helped himself to some chili and crackers. His sister Karen was looking over some papers she had received from Don. Karen had been the first overseer of the Earth and had done a fairly consistent job. Not good, just consistent. Unfortunately, this could not bring the Earth into balance, either, with the same gods at her disposal. She had tried everything she could think of, including some things best not mentioned. She'd been replaced by her brother, but if this last iteration failed, she would be given another shot and her brother demoted. Somehow she had wormed her way into the good graces of the Universal Overgod. Unknown to Fred, his sister was consistently looking over his shoulder, biding her time until Fred would screw up so bad that he'd have to be replaced. To ensure this happened, she'd been secretly working against him using the gods as chess pieces to his check and mate. She pretended sympathy and offered advice. You just need your inspirational guidance. Be assertive and more hands-on, and you can lead them to success. She knew darn well the gods would rebel the more hands-on Fred got. They bridled at micromanagement, and well, she knew it. But Fred was a trusting soul and would probably do what she said. Luckily, Fred hadn't told her about the inspiration he'd had that afternoon. He was keeping this one close to the vest in case it didn't pan out. If it did, he'd have the job for another 100 iterations, and his sister would be moved to a new position of the galaxy and demoted. In the meantime, she consistently tried to meddle in his affairs, distracting him and offering her sage advice based on her own attempts. Well, if this worked, she would finally be out of his hair. He ruminated on the fact that of all the overseer gods, he was the only one with a fraternal twin. They were an experiment by the supreme deity, with each twin being endowed with positive or negative energy. Kieran had received the negative energy of envy, jealousy, pride, and ambition. Fred had received humility, sympathy, faith, and aspiration. Forcing them to live together had been the deity's own idea. He wanted to see if one would change the attributes of the other. So far, the experiment was a failure, and come what may after this iteration, the two would be separated and go their own ways. Okay, that's it for this chapter. Next one is something up Fred's sleeve, so we'll figure out what he's requested from his head god. So that's so I haven't been doing this because my voice is gone. So that's it for today, and we'll be back up in a couple of days. So that's it for today. Be good to yourself, and have a good day. So talk to you later. Bye.